Alpha King was stunned, then he roared, "No one dares come close." Its forests whispered in the wind, and shadows moved as if alive, curling around the stone walls of the castle like watchful guardians. At the heart of this land ruled Kale, the Alpha King, a man whose name inspired awe and fear in equal measure. His power was legendary, drawn from an ancient lineage, and his eyes, silver as the winter moon, could pierce through both light and lies. For years, Kale had walked the castle corridors alone, keeping his heart sealed behind walls of pride and strength. Many had tried to approach him, many had sought his favor, but none had crossed the invisible barrier he built around himself. He was a storm contained in a man, untouchable, unyielding, until the day Leora came. Leora appeared in the small village on the edge of the eastern woods, carrying only a satchel of herbs and a cloak that smelled faintly of rain and earth. Her hair, black as raven feathers, fell loosely over her shoulders, and her green eyes held a quiet fire that seemed to pulse with life itself. She was a healer, gifted in the ways of plants and magic, though she had never sought power. She only wished to help, to mend what was broken. But power, Kale had learned, had a way of finding those who least expected it. The first sighting of her came during the royal hunt. Kale rode through the forest, his steed silent as the shadows, when a sudden movement caught his eye. There she was, kneeling by a brook, tending to a wounded fox. The sun, low on the horizon, painted her in gold and shadow, and for the first time in decades, Kale felt a pull in his chest, a strange, unfamiliar warmth that made his breath catch. He halted his horse, eyes narrowing. Few dared appear in these woods without permission, and fewer still escaped his notice. Yet she did not look at him. Her hands moved with calm precision, and her lips parted slightly as she whispered an incantation. The fox stirred, healed, and then bounded away into the trees. Kale found himself both angered and intrigued. How could someone possess such power without authority? How could someone walk so freely through lands guarded by his fiercest soldiers? He decided to approach. "Who are you?" His voice rolled over the water like distant thunder. Leora's head lifted slowly, and for a moment her eyes met his. There was no fear, only recognition, as if she had been waiting for him all her life. "I am Leora," she said softly. "I mean no harm." Kale's silver eyes studied her. There was honesty there, and yet something more, a hidden fire, untamed and wild. He had seen many try to hide their power, to cloak it beneath smiles or submission. Few succeeded. Leora did not hide. She simply existed, fully alive, and that existence disturbed him in ways he could not name. "You should leave," he said, though his voice held a note of something softer, almost reluctant. "This forest is not safe for travelers." "I am safe enough," she replied, her tone calm but steady. "I do not seek the dangers of kings or forests." Kale frowned. There was a certainty about her that made his pulse quicken and his instincts clash. Normally, he would have turned away, sending her with a warning, but he could not. Something about her presence called to the storm inside him. They spent a moment in silence. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of moss and rain. The fox's distant cry echoed like a warning, and still neither spoke. Finally, Kale turned his horse, giving her one last look. "You do not belong here," he said. "Do not cross my lands again." Leora nodded, but her gaze lingered on him, curious and unafraid. "I will tread carefully," she said, and with that she disappeared into the forest, leaving Kale staring after her, unnervingly aware of a strange emptiness he had not felt in years. That night the castle seemed quieter than usual. Kale sat alone in the high tower, the moonlight casting silver shadows across the walls. His thoughts returned to the healer he had seen by the brook. There was something in her, he realized, something that made him uneasy and restless. He did not understand it, but he could not ignore it. Meanwhile, in a small inn on the edge of the forest, Leora laid out her herbs and medicines. She had come to Valerian seeking safety, but she already felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her. She did not know the king personally, but she had heard the stories, the tales of his unmatched strength, his untouchable presence. And yet when she saw him, she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a strange recognition, as if their paths were tied together by some thread of fate. Days passed. Leora moved quietly through the village, helping those in need. The villagers whispered about her magic, both awed and cautious. Kale, from his castle, observed from the distance, watching her interactions, noting the ease with which she healed, comforted, and yet remained untethered. The more he watched, the more he realized that her power was not just in her hands, but in her presence, a quiet, undeniable force. It was during the third day that the first real test came. A shadow had crept into the village, a strange illness that left the villagers weak and frightened. Leora moved among them, her hands steady as she prepared remedies, but the illness was stronger than any she had faced before. It was not of this world. Its darkness pulsed like a living thing. Kale felt the disturbance from his castle. A flicker of anger and concern flared in him. He could not explain why, but the thought of danger near Leora unsettled him more than any threat to his kingdom. Without a word, he mounted his horse and rode toward the village, the wind whipping around him, the silver light of the moon casting him as a figure of inevitability. He arrived just as Leora was attempting to soothe a child struck by the illness. She looked up, startled but not afraid. "You," she whispered, recognition in her eyes. "Step aside," Kale said, his voice low and commanding. "This is not safe for you." "I cannot," she replied simply. "I will not leave until they are healed." Kale's eyes softened, but only for a moment. He saw her resolve, the same stubborn fire he had glimpsed by the brook. His hand moved instinctively, but he did not touch her. He did not dare. Instead, he watched as she called upon her magic, murmuring ancient words that shimmered in the air like silver threads. The shadow of the illness recoiled, almost as if aware of her power, and slowly the villagers began to recover. When it was over, Kale approached her. His silver gaze met her green eyes, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink around them. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "And you are unlike anyone I have ever known," she replied. For a long moment they stood there in silence. The village was safe, yet the tension between them was undeniable. It was not just desire, it was recognition of power, of destiny, of something that neither fully understood. Kale finally stepped back, his instincts warring with the strange pull he felt toward her. "Go," he said, almost reluctantly. "Do not return to these lands again. It is for your safety." Leora looked at him, and for a moment her eyes shimmered with unspoken questions. "I do not know if I can," she said softly, almost to herself. Kale's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to demand her obedience, to protect her from the pull of destiny he could already feel. Yet he knew the truth. He could not command her heart, nor could he stop the fire she had begun in him. The night grew colder and the shadows stretched long. Kale mounted his horse, giving her one last glance, one last moment of connection that neither could explain. Leora watched him ride away, her heart unsettled, knowing that their meeting was only the beginning of something neither could avoid. As the moon climbed higher, both of them felt the silent thread that had been tied between them, unseen, unbroken, and dangerous. It was a thread that promised change, struggle, and perhaps redemption, but neither knew how it would bind them, or whether they could survive the storm it would bring. And deep in the forest, unseen by human eyes, a shadow stirred. It watched them both, patient, waiting for the moment when the fire between the healer and the king would ignite fully, and the kingdom of Valerian would never be the same again. The morning after the mysterious shadow stirred in the forest, the kingdom of Valerian seemed quieter than usual. Mist hung low over the hills, curling around trees like soft fingers, and the air carried a subtle hum, as if the land itself was holding its breath. In the castle, Kale moved through the grand halls with his usual precision, yet a restless tension clung to him like a second skin. The healer's presence haunted his thoughts. Leora, her name whispered through his mind like an unbidden song. She had healed not only the villagers but something within him, something he had thought long dead. Kale was a king of power and control, yet she had stirred a vulnerability he had never known. And yet, he could not bring himself to summon her to the castle. It was dangerous, he reminded himself. It was a risk he could not allow. Meanwhile, Leora remained in the village, tending to the subtle aftereffects of the shadow illness. Children who had seemed almost lost now ran through the streets again, and the adults whispered her name with reverence. Yet she felt the pull of the castle, of the silver-eyed king whose presence had unsettled her from the first glance. She knew the forest shadow was not done, and a deep, unshakable curiosity compelled her to learn more. The court was a place of whispers, intrigue, and constant observation. Kale entered the great hall, his silver eyes scanning the room as though he were weighing every soul present. He did not speak of the healer, but every guard, every courtier, every noble seemed to feel the tension radiating from him. It is unusual for the Alpha King to be distracted, one advisor murmured to another, noting the distant look in Kale's eyes. But Kale did not hear them. His mind was on Leora, the way her hands moved when she healed, the calm determination in her eyes, and the subtle, untamed magic that clung to her like mist. He could not deny it. She had touched something in him that no one else had, something he had hidden even from himself. Days passed and rumors began to swirl in the kingdom. Strange occurrences followed Leora wherever she went. Sudden gusts of wind, animals approaching her without fear, shadows seeming to shift around her. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, calling her blessed or cursed, unsure which. It was inevitable that Kale would hear of these rumors. He had no desire to see them verified, yet when a court messenger arrived, his curiosity overcame his caution. "Bring her to the castle," he commanded, his voice carrying authority that left no room for argument. When Leora arrived, escorted by guards who barely dared look at her, she felt a pulse of unease. The castle was immense, its walls steeped in history and power, yet she did not fear it. She had learned long ago to face places of strength with calm, and her eyes, green and sharp, met Kale's the moment she entered the hall. "Welcome to Valerian," Kale said, his voice even but with a weight that seemed to press against her chest. "You have stirred more than the villagers' admiration. The court has spoken of your unusual abilities." "I do not wish for admiration," Leora said softly. "I only wish to help and to remain safe." Kale studied her, and for a heartbeat his mask of authority slipped. He saw honesty, courage, and something else he could not name, something dangerous and magnetic. He could not turn away, even if he wanted to. "You will remain within the castle grounds," he said finally. "It is for your protection." Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "I will follow your guidance," she said. Yet in her heart, a spark of curiosity resisted confinement. She had come seeking safety, but it seemed she had found something far more complex. A kingdom ruled by a man both powerful and haunted, and a destiny that was tied to him whether she wanted it or not. The first days in the castle were uneasy. Leora moved through the stone corridors, tending to the sick and wounded who were brought to her from the outskirts of the kingdom. Kale observed silently from the shadows, a mixture of pride and unease twisting inside him. He had never let anyone approach him so closely, and yet he found himself compelled to watch over her, to ensure she was unharmed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the castle was bathed in the deep red of twilight, Leora found herself in the gardens. Flowers bloomed unnaturally bright, as if responding to her presence, and the air shimmered faintly with magic. She did not notice Kale at first, standing behind a marble fountain, his silver eyes fixed on her. "You seem at ease here," he said quietly, stepping closer. I am, Leora replied, her voice calm, though her heart raced. I feel the magic of this place and it welcomes me. Kale frowned. Magic is not always kind, he said. It can bind you as easily as it can protect you. Leora turned to face him fully, her gaze meeting his. I know, she said. I have felt the weight of my gift, but I also know it can do good if guided wisely. For a moment they stood there in silence. The garden seemed to hold its breath. Kale's hand twitched as if he wanted to reach for her, to grasp something intangible, yet he restrained himself. There was a power in her presence that both intrigued and terrified him. You are unlike anyone I have known, he said, his voice low. And you are unlike anyone I have met, she replied. The words hung between them, fragile as glass, yet filled with the weight of recognition. They were both aware of a bond forming, silent and undeniable, but neither could name it, nor could they fully control it. Days turned into weeks, and the court began to notice the connection between the Alpha King and the healer. Whispers followed Leora wherever she went, some admiring, some wary. Nobles speculated about her origin, about the magic she carried, and about the way Kale's attention seemed fixed on her. Yet danger was not far behind. A rival sorcerer, once a trusted advisor of the king, had begun to stir unrest in the shadows. He coveted the power of the Alpha King, and he knew that Leora's magic could be used to manipulate Kale, to break his focus and weaken his rule. The first sign of trouble came when a shadow moved through the castle corridors, unseen but sensed by both Kale and Leora. Doors creaked, candles flickered, and a chill ran down the spines of all who walked the halls. Kale's instincts sharpened. He moved silently through the castle, finding Leora in the library, her hands hovering over a tome of ancient spells. You felt it too, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Yes, she replied. Something is watching, it is not natural. Kale stepped closer, his presence a shield around her. You must not face it alone, he said. I cannot allow it. Leora nodded. Then we face it together, she said. The bond between them strengthened in that moment, not through words but through understanding, through shared purpose. It was no longer just curiosity or fascination. It was trust, fragile but growing, and it carried a weight neither had expected. That night the shadow revealed itself. It was subtle at first, moving through the castle like smoke, unseen but felt. The servants whispered of strange noises, of objects moving without cause. Leora and Kale met in the grand hall, standing side by side, sensing the presence without needing to speak. You feel it, Kale said, his voice low. Yes, Leora replied. It is drawn to power, yours and mine. Kale's eyes narrowed. Then we must be careful. Together we are strong. Alone it may overwhelm us. They spent the night walking the castle, their presence steady and commanding. Leora's hands glowed faintly with magic, illuminating the halls in a soft silver light. Kale's presence was like a shield, a constant force that pushed back the darkness. By dawn, the shadow had receded, but both knew it would return. The danger was growing, and with it, the tension between them. They were drawn to each other, yet the shadow reminded them of the stakes. Power was dangerous, and desire could be as perilous as any enemy. The following morning, Kale summoned Leora to the tower. He stood by the window, looking out over the kingdom, his expression unreadable. You are changing the way I see this world, he said quietly. I have ruled these lands for decades, yet you make me feel something I thought lost. Leora stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of the window sill. I do not wish to change you, she said softly, only to walk with you if you will let me. Kale's gaze met hers, silver meeting green. For a long moment neither spoke. There was tension, recognition, and the unspoken promise of something more. You may walk with me, he said finally, his voice firm yet gentle. But do not mistake this for weakness. Together we are strong, but alone either of us could be destroyed. Leora nodded, understanding. I will not falter, she said. Kale allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was the first sign of warmth in months, perhaps years. And as the sun rose over the horizon, casting gold and crimson across the castle walls, neither of them noticed the shadow moving silently among the trees outside, waiting for the moment to strike. The bond between them had grown, and with it the danger. The kingdom of Valerian was quiet under a pale moon, but within the castle walls, tension simmered like a storm ready to break. Kale, the Alpha King, paced the high tower, his silver eyes scanning the night sky. The shadow that had stirred in the forest weeks ago had returned, more cunning than before, and Kale could feel its presence pressing against the edges of the castle like a cold, unseen hand. Yet even as the danger grew, Kale's thoughts remained tethered to Leora. Her magic, subtle yet powerful, had become a lifeline to him, a force that could both anchor and challenge him. He had grown accustomed to her presence, yet every time he saw her, a strange, unexplainable tension surged through him, a mixture of admiration, caution, and longing he could not name. Leora, for her part, felt the weight of the castle's history pressing down on her. The walls held whispers of kings, queens, and sorcerers long gone, and every corridor seemed to echo with secrets. She had spent weeks learning the rhythm of Kale's world, tending to those who required her help, and understanding the subtle, quiet power that surrounded him. And yet, for all her experience with magic, she could not explain the pull she felt toward the Alpha King. It was as if an invisible thread bound them together, unbroken, unyielding. The shadow made its move during the night. Servants spoke of strange lights in the corridors, of objects shifting on their own, of doors creaking open and closed without cause. Leora felt it first as a chill along her spine, then as a whisper in her mind, soft and insistent. Kale found her in the library, surrounded by ancient tomes. Her hands glowed faintly, illuminating the darkened shelves, and her eyes were focused, intense. "You feel it," Kale said quietly, stepping closer. "Yes," Leora replied. "It is near, stronger than before." Kale's jaw tightened. "We must prepare," he said. "Alone, you would be vulnerable. Together, we can hold it back, but we must remain careful." Leora nodded. "I am ready," she said. "I will not let it harm you or the kingdom." They spent hours that night tracing the movements of the shadow through the castle. Leora's magic lit the dark corners, revealing only fleeting traces of its presence. Kale's instincts, honed over decades of leadership, guided them, and together they moved through the castle like a single, silent force. Days later, the tension began to take its toll. Kale found himself restless, unable to focus even in council meetings. Leora's absence for a few hours sent an unexpected ache through him, a longing he could not name. He tried to dismiss it, reminding himself that a king must remain strong, that attachment could be a weakness, but the feeling persisted. Leora, too, struggled. The weight of her magic, the constant vigilance required in the castle, and the growing awareness of the bond between her and Kale left her exhausted. She had faced powerful forces before, but never had she felt such a connection that was both comforting and unsettling. She wanted to be near him, to support him, yet she feared the consequences if she allowed herself to care too deeply. One evening, Kale found her in the gardens once more, the moonlight casting silver shadows across her face. She was speaking softly to a wounded bird, her hands glowing faintly as she healed it. "You care too much," Kale said, stepping from the shadows. His voice was low, almost a growl, carrying a mixture of concern and something more vulnerable. Leora looked up, startled but unafraid. "I care because it is necessary," she said softly, "and because I want to." Kale's chest tightened. He wanted to reach out, to touch her, to tell her that he understood, that he felt the same pull, but he could not. Power and control were his birthright, and vulnerability was something he had long rejected. Yet here, in the quiet of the garden, he felt both the thrill and the danger of it. The shadow grew bolder, testing them both. Strange events began to occur in the castle. Whispers in empty corridors, doors locking and unlocking on their own, and a creeping chill that seemed to follow them. Leora's magic flared in response, revealing glimpses of the shadow as a formless, shifting presence, dark and patient. Kale's instincts told him that the shadow was drawn to both of them, to their bond and their power. He knew it would not relent, and he feared the consequences if it succeeded. He also knew, deep in his heart, that he could not face it without Leora. And yet, relying on anyone, especially someone so untested in matters of power, was a risk. "Kale," Leora said one evening, her voice steady but tinged with concern, "we are stronger together. We have faced trials before and we have survived. You do not need to carry this alone." Kale looked at her, silver eyes meeting green, and for a moment the walls he had built around himself faltered. "I am not accustomed to needing anyone," he admitted quietly, "but I cannot deny that I rely on you more than I should." Her hand brushed lightly against his, a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of trust, support, and unspoken understanding. Kale felt the warmth of it, and a strange calm settled over him, a calm that was rare and fleeting in his world of power and shadows. Then came the night of true confrontation. The shadow surged through the castle, more tangible and threatening than ever before. Leora and Kale faced it in the grand hall, their powers combining in a display of light and force. Leora's magic pulsed like silver threads, weaving through the darkness, while Kale's presence radiated strength and authority. Together, they held the shadow at bay, but it was cunning and relentless, testing their limits. "You must focus," Kale said, his voice firm yet gentle. "Do not let fear control you." "I am not afraid," Leora said, though her heart raced. "I am with you." And in that moment the bond between them deepened, not through words but through shared purpose and trust. Their combined strength pushed back the shadow, forcing it to retreat, though neither could say for how long. When the danger subsided, Kale and Leora stood close, their breaths mingling, the tension between them undeniable. Kale's hand brushed hers again, almost instinctively, and this time he did not pull away. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," he said quietly, his voice softer than before. "And you are unlike anyone I have met," Leora replied, her eyes shining with the same mixture of trust and something more profound. They stood there in silence, the weight of the night pressing around them. They had faced danger, yes, but they had also faced their own hearts. The bond between them was no longer simple curiosity or necessity. It was recognition of something deeper, something neither could fully understand but both felt undeniably. The next morning brought a fragile peace. Kale returned to his duties, yet he felt the presence of Leora even in her absence. She, too, carried the echo of the night, the sense of connection that was both comforting and perilous. But danger had not left them entirely. The shadow lingered beyond the castle walls, patient and calculating. It was drawn to their bond, their power, and it would return. Leora and Kale both knew this. They had survived the first assault, but the true test was yet to come. For the first time, Kale allowed himself to acknowledge a truth he had long ignored. He needed her. Not merely as a healer, not merely as an ally, but as someone who had touched the part of him he had thought forever lost. And Leora, in turn, felt the same pull. She had come seeking refuge, yet she had found something more, a bond that challenged her, strengthened her, and called to a part of her she had not known existed. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Kale and Leora met once more in the gardens. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the sky was a canvas of gold and violet. "You are changing me," Kale said quietly, his voice almost vulnerable. "I do not fully understand it, yet I cannot deny it." "And you are changing me as well," Leora replied softly. "I feel it in my magic, in my heart, in everything." For a moment, they simply stood together, the quiet of the garden wrapping around them like a protective cloak. The shadow lingered somewhere beyond, unseen but present, a reminder that their bond, while strong, was not yet safe. "You are not alone," Kale said finally, his hand brushing hers once more. "I will not let you face anything alone." Leora nodded, her heart swelling with both hope and caution. "Nor will I let you face it alone," she said. And as the night deepened, both of them felt it, the silent promise of trials to come, the strength of the bond they had forged, and the knowledge that their hearts were now tied together, willingly and irrevocably. The shadow, patient and cunning, waited in the darkness. It knew that the connection between the Alpha King and the healer was both their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. And when it struck again, it would test not only their power but the trust, love, and courage they had found in each other. The night was thick with mist and shadow when Kale stood at the highest tower of the castle, gazing out across the kingdom of Valerian. The stars were faint above the clouds, and a cold wind whispered secrets through the stone battlements. Something had shifted in the air. The presence of the shadow had grown stronger, more patient, more cunning. Kale knew its return was imminent, and he also knew that this time, the stakes would be higher than ever before. Beside him, Leora moved with quiet grace. Her green eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, the light of her magic weaving like silver threads around her fingers. She had spent days preparing, reinforcing spells, studying ancient wards, and strengthening her bond with Kale. Together, they were formidable, yet the weight of the coming confrontation pressed upon them both. "You feel it too," Kale said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Leora nodded. "It is close, stronger than before. It knows we are ready." Kale turned to her, silver eyes meeting green. "We must be cautious. This time it will not only test our power but our hearts." Leora's hand brushed his arm, a subtle gesture of trust. "Then we face it together." The shadow struck just as the first light of dawn touched the castle towers. It moved like smoke through the corridors, twisting and coiling, seeking weakness. The castle trembled as its presence surged, and the air itself seemed to hum with the force of its power. Kale and Leora stood in the grand hall, side by side, ready. Kale's aura radiated strength, commanding the castle itself to rise against the darkness, while Leora's magic flared like silver fire, illuminating the shadows. "It is stronger than before," Leora whispered, her voice steady despite the tension. "Then we must be stronger," Kale replied, his jaw set with determination. Together they confronted the shadow. Its form shifted constantly, a dark, writhing mass that seemed alive with malice and cunning. It lunged toward them, but they moved as one, their powers intertwining in a brilliant display of light and force. Leora's spells wound around Kale's strength, stabilizing him, anchoring him, while Kale's presence gave her courage, focus, and protection. For a moment it seemed as if they were pushing the shadow back, forcing it to retreat. But the darkness was patient, relentless, and it tested every ounce of their resolve. Hours passed in a tense struggle. The grand hall shook with the clash of light and shadow, and yet Kale and Leora did not falter. Each movement, each spell, each glance between them carried unspoken understanding and trust. They had learned each other's strengths, fears, and rhythms, and in that knowledge they found power greater than any magic or force of darkness. At one point, the shadow surged directly toward Kale, its dark tendrils reaching for him. He froze, feeling its pull against his strength, threatening to overwhelm him. In that moment, Leora stepped forward, her hands glowing with brilliant light, and she reached for him. "Kale, trust me," she said, her voice calm and unwavering. He met her gaze, silver and green locking in an unspoken promise. He nodded, allowing her to anchor him, to share her power. A surge of warmth and light enveloped them both, driving back the shadow with a force so strong that the walls of the hall trembled. For the first time, the shadow screamed, not in sound but in force and presence, as it was forced to retreat. Yet even as it vanished into the darkness beyond the castle walls, both Kale and Leora knew that it had not been defeated. It had learned, adapted, and would return if they let their guard slip. When the battle ended, the grand hall was quiet. The candles flickered, the air hummed with residual energy, and Kale and Leora stood together, their breaths mingling, their hands brushing, their hearts beating in unison. "You were incredible," Kale said softly, his voice carrying admiration and something deeper. "And you were," Leora replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did this together." Kale looked at her, silver eyes softening. "I could not have faced it without you. I need you, Leora, not just in battle, but always." Her hand found his, holding it lightly, and she felt the warmth of his strength beneath her fingers. "And I need you," she said. "You have shown me courage, trust, and a bond I never expected. I will walk beside you always." The moment was fragile yet powerful. It was not just desire, it was recognition, understanding, and trust forged in the fires of danger. For Kale and Leora, it was a beginning, not just of love, but of a partnership rooted in strength and respect. The following days brought peace, but also reflection. Kale returned to his duties as king, but he did so differently now. He was still commanding, still strong, but he carried the knowledge that true strength came not from domination, but from trust and connection. Leora remained by his side, helping those in need, teaching magic, and guiding the people with a quiet wisdom that drew respect and admiration. The bond between them grew in ways neither had anticipated. They shared quiet moments in the gardens, their conversations flowing freely, their laughter echoing through the halls. Yet there were also moments of tension, of testing, where they challenged each other, learning the limits of trust and the depth of loyalty. One evening, Kale led Leora to the highest tower once more. The moon had risen, full and silver, casting a calm glow across the kingdom. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yes," she replied, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "The shadow is gone for now." "But we must remain vigilant." Kale nodded. "Yes, but even more, we must remain together. No darkness can break what we have forged if we trust each other." Leora smiled. "I trust you," she said simply, and in her voice was a quiet strength that matched his own. Kale reached for her hand, and this time he did not hesitate. Their fingers entwined, and a sense of calm, of purpose, and of belonging flowed between them. For the first time in decades, Kale allowed himself to hope, not just for victory, but for life, for love, for redemption. The shadow lingered in distant lands, patient and watchful, but its threat no longer dominated them. Kale and Leora had learned to face it not with fear, but with unity. Their bond had become their strength, and their trust had become their shield. Together they had faced darkness and emerged stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. In the quiet moments when the castle rested and the people slept, Kale and Leora would walk through the gardens, speak under the moon, and find solace in each other's presence. They had discovered that true power did not lie in magic or force alone, but in connection, courage, and love. And as dawn broke over Valerian, the kingdom bathed in golden light, it was clear that a new era had begun. The Alpha King was no longer alone, and the healer who had entered his life unexpectedly had become the heart that anchored him. Together, they looked toward the horizon, knowing that trials would come again, but confident that nothing could shake the bond they had forged. The shadow might wait, but it would never break them. Kale's silver eyes met Leora's green once more, and in that gaze was a silent promise that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as equals, as partners, and as hearts bound by trust, courage, and love. And for the first time in many long years, the kingdom of Valerian was truly at peace, not because there was no darkness, but because its king and his healer had learned that light and love could conquer even the deepest shadows.